Hey everyone, welcome to UK Media Warrior. Today, it's Doctor Who. Season 10, Episode 11, World Enough and Time. Okay, well let's get into this. I mean, it's the first of a two-parter, which will make up the finale of this season, and the end of Peter Capaldi's run as the Doctor. Now, I was on the understanding that Peter Capaldi was going out in the Christmas special. But at the start of this episode, which is the first of the two-parters, as I said, you see him stumble out of the TARDIS, fall to his knees, and start to regenerate. So I'm now not sure whether he's going to regenerate fully at the end of next week's story, or if it's going to somehow put it off and he's going to regenerate in the Christmas special. I don't know. I might be wrong. They may have changed their plans. Perhaps he isn't going to be in the Christmas special after all. Perhaps that's going to be the new Doctor. That's happened before. David Tennant really started his run in the Christmas special, so it wouldn't be unknown. But anyway, this episode, World Enough and Time. I've watched a few other reviews from different people about this episode, and nearly all of them start by saying the same thing. Their main disappointment with this episode was the fact that they knew what was coming. In all the, the media, the trailers, the photos that have been in magazines, the way the BBC have advertised these episodes, we knew we were going to see the Mondasian Cybermen, and we knew that the Doctor was going to regenerate. So we knew all that going into it. So with that said, and the Master, obviously we knew John Sims was coming back as the Master, because he was in photos all over the place. They interviewed him on shows. So, so everyone's main complaint about this episode is, if we hadn't have known any of that, this episode would have been fantastic. It would have been, you would have been jaw-droppingly shocked throughout the majority of this episode. But you did know all of that. So by the time you got to the end of the episode, you knew there was going to be Cybermen, Mondasian Cybermen. You knew John Sims was going to come back. So it took a large amount of the energy and the enjoyment out of this show, because you knew what was going to happen. Now, as I said, this is the first of a two-parter, so we don't really get to see the Mondasian Cybermen in force, it seems, until next week. You only ever get to see one full Mondasian Cyberman, and that turns out to be the converted Bill, and she pops up at the very, very last 5 minutes of this episode to make the Doctor feel like shit. To be fair to the Doctor, in this case, it wasn't really his fault, but we'll get to that. So anyway, with that said, how did I like this episode? Now, if anyone has been looking at my reviews on this season, you'll know it hasn't been a good season for me. I haven't really liked pretty much the majority of the episodes in this season. I haven't liked Bill as a companion. I think the writing's been sloppy. I had high hopes to go out on a high for Peter Capaldi on this season, especially if they're bringing back the Mondasian Cybermen. Now, I was intrigued as to how they were going to do that. Now, I say that because pretty much so far, this new Doctor Who from Chris Eccleston, Russell T Davies' time up to now, has stayed faithful to the original Doctor Who 50 odd years back and moving forward. Storylines in canon that was set up back then, they've pretty much stayed true to. So how they're going to do the Mondasian Cybermen, we know, anyone who knows Doctor Who, who's a Doctor Who fan, who's done research or read books, knows that the Mondasian Cybermen, how they came into being, how the Cybermen were born. People know this. It's been done. It's solid in canon. So how are they going to bring back Mondasian Cybermen in this episode? It was very, very intriguing to me. I wasn't sure how they were going to do it, because originally the Cybermen, the Mondasian Cybermen, any Cybermen, first appeared in the episode The 10th Planet, which was the last episode of William Hartnell's run as the very first Doctor. They turn up in our solar system in the future with the desire to drain the energy from Earth. And the Doctor finds out that Mondas used to be the twin of Earth until it was knocked out of our solar system. Now, because of that, it was just a natural event. Now, because of that, the inhabitants of Mondas slowly replaced their bodily parts with machines simply to survive. And then eventually they replaced emotion totally to take the pain and all that away. After that, they managed to build a huge engine into Mondas so they could steer it around the galaxy and around the universe. And they became a race of conquerors. They would invade a planet and turn its inhabitants into more Cybermen because it was the only way they could reproduce. And then finally, they come back to Earth to try and drain Earth's energy, and the Doctor has to destroy Mondas to stop that from happening and to save the Earth. Okay, so that was the original classic origin of Cybermen. Now, because Mondas was destroyed, that doesn't mean that was the end of the Cybermen. There were Cybermen spaceships out there because they were very far advanced technologically than humans were. So there were Cybermen spaceships out there. The Cybermen returned many times during the course of the original series. And they were good stories. I like the Cybermen. They were normally very good stories. So what were they going to do here? Now, how they've reintroduced the Mondasian Cybermen has left me a little bit confused. Firstly, it didn't have to be the Mondasian Cybermen. In fact, there's nothing in this episode which lends itself to say, oh, it had to be this. There was no other way they could have done it. It had to be this particular style of Cybermen. And no, it didn't. It could have been any Cyberman from any period of time. It didn't have to be the Mondasians. But it's a Stephen Moffat episode. It was written by him. And as he tends to do, he likes to go back into the past, pick out an enemy or something from the Doctors that people like, and drag it into one of his stories because he thinks people will watch his shows if there's this reminiscence sort of thing, this nostalgia element to it. For me, at least, that didn't work. This would have worked better if it hadn't have been the Mondasians, because it doesn't make any sense. If we're going by canon, if we're going to assume that they are still trying to stay faithful to canon, then Missy says at the end of this episode, well, this big 400-mile-long spaceship, this colony ship, was made on Mondas, came from Mondas. Okay, but it's empty. There was nobody on it. So why would the Mondasians create a colony ship that was empty and then send it into space? Where was it heading? What era of time are they talking about? Is this a Mondasian spaceship from before Mondas was knocked out of our solar system? Was it afterwards? If it was afterwards, wouldn't they have filled it with their own people to try and escape Mondas? If it was before, then why were they building these huge 400-mile-long colony ships for other races? It just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem to hang together. It would have worked better if this had just been perhaps a more futuristic Cybermen outfit who had invaded this spaceship and taken it over somehow. It gets a little bit convoluted and a little bit overcomplicated, and it didn't have to be that. Secondly, the way they've done it on this show, on this episode, the reason that they're changing into Cybermen is because the team that were sent back to the engines to put them in reverse were back. Actually, thinking about it, why didn't they just get back in a lift and come back to the top? Actually, the more I think about that, the more that doesn't make... the lifts obviously work because people go up and down in the lifts. The Cybermen come up to the top to get Bill, and then the Doctor and all that, and the Cybermen, of course, obviously go back down to the bottom. So if the lifts work, and the blue guy said, well, we sent a team back to switch the engines over to reverse, why they couldn't have done that in the cockpit, in the bridge of the ship, I don't know, but they had to send a team back to the bottom of the ship to reverse the engines. They never came back, and because time was moving so fast for them in the back of the ship than it was for those on the bridge at the top, they started having families to survive, and because none of this makes any sense. You know, if you give this some serious thought now, okay, so this team goes back, they switch the engines back into reverse. As far as they're concerned, time is acting normally. Jump back into a lift, go back up to the top. Okay, all the fun stuff would have then happened at the top of the ship when they got back there and found that time hadn't been working right at all. So they could have just got back into the lifts and go back up. So the fact that they stayed behind, raised families together, which actually, just from a genetics point of view, was impossible. You need more than 20 people to start a survivable race. The genetics wouldn't be varied enough; they would die off. So that wouldn't work. So that, beside the point, I suppose. But anyway, that wouldn't work. But anyway, these 20 people have families. The population booms to thousands, as you see on those ships, on those screens, on the scans. And then because the ship is falling apart because it's so old at the back, the deck upon which they live has now been polluted. So they have to start replacing their bodily parts with machine parts just to survive on that deck. But then they've got this Project Exodus, because once everyone has been converted to Cybermen, they're going to go above deck and keep going up, which is exactly what happened in the original Mondas episode. The origins of the Cybermen on Mondas, because it's out floating around in the universe, the population had to change themselves into machines to survive. So it's the same basic story, but it's just on the colony ship for some reason. Okay, what else? Let's move on from that. Missy, fantastic. Michelle Gomez, my God, that girl can act. She was in this entire episode and I absolutely loved her. And once again, I wish the BBC would give us a Missy and Doctor season of adventures. Just those two together. Absolutely incredible. I'd love to see that. But watching her make out she's the Doctor and say, oh no, his real name is Doctor Who, he was just trying to be pretentious by doing that. It was like really funny the way she treated Bill and Nardole. Really had me grinning. It was just wonderful to watch her on screen doing that. So it was a high point to have her in the entire episode for once, rather than just 5 minutes here and there in previous episodes. So that's good. And of course, the question still remains: is she good now? Has she turned bad again? Now she's met up with her previous self, which really screws up the timeline. How can she not remember she was here prior? Now, okay, admittedly, the master, the John Sims master, went through a ton of shit himself, so it's possible his memory's been affected. But Missy was stating in an episode, a couple of episodes back, I think it was, when she was talking to the Doctor, how she can remember everything. How she remembers all the people she killed. She can even remember their names, and she didn't think that would be possible when she was crying. So I don't think she's going back evil. I think she really does want to be good, because this is a future master. So the John Sims master is still evil. We know that. That's who he was at that time. He was an evil person. But Missy is a future master. She can adapt. She can evolve into a better person. She can grow. So I honestly think that we're going to find Missy is going to either be self-sacrificing at the end of the next episode to try and save everyone, as the ultimate, proof that she is now good, or she's going to do something. But she's going to. I really hope this is going to be the case. I hope she stays good. But we'll see. But I hope that's going to happen. What other good points? Peter Capaldi wasn't in this episode very much, but he was really good, especially when he was talking about him and Missy and how he needs Missy to be good because she's the only other Time Lord out there. It's him and her, and he needs to see that she is redeemable. So that was great, seeing him telling that to Bill and Nardo. But other than that, the rest, to be honest, the middle part of this show is very boring, and I think the reason was the middle part of this show was basically showing us the evolution of the Cybermen into what Bill becomes at the end of the episode. Seeing these walls with these creatures, you know, these people in these wheelchairs and in pain all the time, all that sort of stuff. It was, if you didn't know that these guys were going to turn into Cybermen, that would be one thing. But because we did, then it was like, yeah. We know where we're going. We know what you're trying to show us. Let's just, move on. But because they kept going back to the walls, because they were taking their time over Bill finding out all these little things, I was just getting bored with that. I wanted more of the Doctor and Missy and Nardo, and I wanted to find out how he was going to save the day and all that. And when this became a two-parter, when I realised this was going on too long, this was going to be a two-parter, I was a little bit surprised. Like, you have Doctor Who stories, like the perfect example is Day of the Doctor. Day of the Doctor is one episode. In that episode, you've got everything. You've got John Hurt in it. It's a slightly longer episode. It's like just over an hour and 10 minutes, maybe, something like that. But it's a fantastic episode. It has action, it has suspense, it has a solid story, it's got amazing acting. It sucks you in and you want to watch every second of that episode. That is how you finish off a season. But this episode, they've stretched to two parts, which they didn't have to do. They could have cut out, like I say, this middle boring bit. They could have shrunk that down by at least 20 minutes. Easily, I would have thought. And, you know, because the BBC knew that we were going to see all of this marketing, we would know that the Cybermen were there. So they didn't have to take their time dragging us through this revelation of Bill finding out about the Cybermen. And equally, Bill in this episode is actually quite stupid. They've been trying to play her up as smart, as somebody who looks at things outside the box but can quickly put two and two together. And yet, she doesn't seem to have her head together on this one. She doesn't seem to be able to pick up obvious things, like when Missy is teasing her about the Doctor's name being Doctor Who. She was saying, his name is really that? And she was dead serious. You could tell she was dead serious. And yet, that's the sort of thing that you wouldn't expect her to be stuck on. You know, it was like, well, yeah, okay, fine, you're teasing me. Very funny, let's move on. So, yeah, she wasn't exactly the quick on the uptake in this episode. So, yeah, they could have made this one episode, a season finale, and perhaps if they wanted to continue the story, continue it at the start of the next season, perhaps. But because obviously you've got Peter Capaldi ending his run here and somebody else will be taking over, perhaps they thought that was going to be too difficult, although it would have been interesting to see a regeneration happen midway in an episode, or in a two-part episode, and then see the new Doctor having to go through his, you know, growing into his new being, because that's always a tricky time for the Doctor. That solves this problem at the same time. So that could have been quite interesting. But if they wanted to make this a one-parter, they could have easily done it, and it would have been just as enjoyable, I think. Now, I don't know what next episode's going to be, the actual finale. I don't know what's going to be in that episode. But from this episode, they could have easily made this a 20-minute episode or story point very easily, and then just made the next episode the end of this. Just make it a slightly longer episode. Like Day of the Doctor, make it like an hour and 10 minutes or something. Make it a special event, return them on Death Sidemen. I don't know, something. But yeah, so the middle of this episode was boring for me. Bill was pretty much a non-event. I just can't get behind that girl. She just annoys me. I don't know what it is. It's just frustrating because everybody else seems to love her, but I'm watching her on screen, I'm thinking she's just acting stupid most of the time, vacant the rest of the time. When she actually got shot, I actually thought, thank God, they're actually going to kill her off. the BBC had the guts to actually kill off a companion like that. But then when you saw the size of the hole in her chest, which was a little bit OTT, I was thinking, oh, no, okay. No, they've got something planned here. And then obviously the Cybermen arrive and cart her off, and I'm thinking, fine, okay. Then bringing her back as a Cyberman at the end of this episode is interesting, though, because it has been established that once you're converted into a Cyberman, you can't go back because the changes they do. Now, whether because this is one of the very, 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 very first Cybermen, the technology is not as evolved, so perhaps it is possible somehow to bring Bill back, but I would be very surprised if she's anything like she was before. I'm hoping they don't. I really would love to see her go and we get a more interesting companion on board. But yeah, so she was a non-event. Another thing they could have probably done without is, you remember Amy and Rory? Amy was the girl who waited for the Doctor. He never came back. And then when he eventually did come back, she was older. They've done exactly the same thing in this episode. They've sent Bill off with the Doctor saying, I'll be back, wait for me. And then she has to wait months, years, however long that is. And then when he eventually does come back, she's older and she's been turned into a Cyberman. And she's like, I waited for you. You didn't come back. I waited. And then we get that tear. Yeah, Moffat, you've done this. You've given us this with Matt Smith and his Doctor and his Amy. You've done this before. You don't need to go over the same stuff over and over again, mate. We get it. A couple of other quick points. How comes the lifts work so fast? If there's this huge time differential between the bottom and the top, why were the lifts going up so many floors so fast? The CGI at the beginning was a very iffy, especially at the point where, I mean, the black hole looked phenomenal, but the ship itself looked very Red Dwarf. If you know what I'm talking about with the TV show, the BBC comedy TV show Red Dwarf. It looked very much like that. Cybermen will take any humanoid being to convert into a Cyberman. They're not picky, they're not choosy. So when this blue guy says, oh, well, they didn't want me because I'm not human, that wouldn't normally be the case. They would take anyone and convert because they need the manpower. So that doesn't really make sense. Why is Bill so petrified of Missy? Missy has done nothing within sight of Bill than being nice. I mean, okay, she's been sarcastic maybe, but she hasn't done anything to scare Bill. All Bill's got to go off is a couple of things that the Doctor would have maybe said about what Missy used to be like. But he wants Missy to be good. So he's not going to slander her. So why Bill is so terrified of Missy just didn't feel right. It felt very awkward. Mrs. Sonic Umbrella. Why not? I mean, hey, you got a Sonic Screwdriver? Give her a Sonic Umbrella. Love that. That's fantastic. The ship. The ship was supposedly put into reverse. According to this blue guy, they put the ship into reverse to get it away from the black hole, and yet it is still facing the black hole. Now, standard starship, spaceship physics would dictate that the only way you're going to have enough energy to get away from the black hole is to turn your ship around so your engines are facing the black hole, so you're using the full force of your engines to get away from that gravitational effect. It's not like a car. You can't just slam it into reverse and that's going to do. No, I mean, when this opening shot begins, when you first see the ship, it's that huge engine glowing and blazing, but that looks like it's pushing the ship towards a black hole because the bridge is at the other end facing the black hole. So even if they did have retros aren't designed to fight against that sort of gravity. The main engine might do, but the retros wouldn't, and that's the only thing you would have to push the ship back. So that was terrible. They should have just swung the ship around, which is what anybody else would have done, but they couldn't do it perhaps because of the plot device. I don't know. But once again, sloppy writing. Pardon me. John Sims played, obviously, the Master at the end of the episode when he demasks, but until that point he was playing he was playing Razor, Bill's friend. But the way he was playing him, the speech patterns, the silly things he was saying, Zaphras, out of Babylon 5. Anyone who has watched Babylon 5, who knows the character of Zaphras, would have instantly recognised that character in John Sims' portrayal of Razor. So that made me grin. I don't know whether he knew that's what he was doing. I don't know whether he'd seen Babylon 5 and seen Zaphras and thought that'd be an interesting take. I'll do it that way. I have no idea. It could just be a coincidence. But it was instantly made me think of that character who I love. So that was good. That was a smile. Basic black hole dynamics. Pretty much anyone who's been to school, who has read a sci-fi novel, who has watched a sci-fi film, knows basic black hole dynamics. How time dilation, the closer you get to the black hole, the slower time goes. Pretty much everyone knows that. You'll probably be hard-pressed to find high school kids who don't know that. And yet the Doctor has to explain this at length to this blue guy, the janitor, because he doesn't understand it. But really, they're explaining it to the audience. But I'm pretty sure, again, they didn't have to do that. I'm pretty sure most of the audience would have been quite happy and quite understanding if the Doctor had just said, well, yes, because the closer you get to the black hole, the slower time moves. So because this ship is so long, and we're at the end that's closest to the black hole, everyone at the other end, time is moving faster. End of discussion. That's it. Leave it at that. You didn't have to get the whiteboard, do diagrams. You didn't need any of that. The Master obviously survives this because we've seen what happens to the Master. He eventually becomes missing. So whatever happens in the next episode, we know John Sims is going to survive. So where in the John Sims Master timeline this particular thing takes place, we don't know. And how exactly, from watching Missy on a TV screen, he figured out that she was himself in the future, how he did that? He was watching basically a frozen image on a TV screen for months. He wouldn't have recognised her. The Doctors sometimes meet each other and don't recognise each other. So that was a bit... yeah, I think the problem is this episode has been loved by the critics. Most of the episodes in this season have been loved by the critics. And most of the episodes in this season I just haven't liked. I've just been thought they've been absolutely dire. I don't know why I'm the only one. I'm seeing all of these problems, but nobody else seems to see them. Am I overthinking it? Well, I don't understand, because I'm seeing these problems as I'm watching the show. I'm not sitting in front of the TV at night thinking, right, Doctor Who's on, let's pick this apart and find all the things that are wrong. No, I sit there wanting to be entertained. I remember when Doctor Who was in its heyday. I loved it. I couldn't wait for Saturday to come around so I could be entertained with Chris Eccleston, David Tennant and Matt Smith even. You know, go back to the original series. I was brought up on the original series. I watched all of the Doctor Who's back then. They were fantastic. Loved them. That's why I'm a fan of Doctor Who now. So to see this season be such a crappy season, and for everybody else to be going, oh, it's amazing, it's the best thing since sliced bread, it really, really isn't. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. We're at the 30-minute mark. This has gone on far too long. I'm so sorry. If you're still with me, thank you for watching. I'll obviously review part 2 next week, and we'll see how this ends. Until then, you guys take care. Thank you again for watching. If you want to subscribe to my YouTube channel, I'll be immensely appreciative. Thank you very much. Or share this on your Facebook. As I say, until then, take care. Look after yourselves. Bye for now.